So to introduce myself, my name is Matt Hayes, and I'm Managing Director of Lean Library. I'm going to be moderating this session. But the important thing is to hear from our three speakers. Just to say, in case you haven't heard of Lean Library, that we are an access solution for libraries. We streamline access for patrons when they're studying and researching remotely, and we also deliver library support and solutions into the patrons' online workflow. So I'm delighted to be joined today by three of our library partners. We have Holly Mercer from the University of Tennessee, Kelly McWatters from Siena College, and Nick Woolley from Sheffield Hallam University here in the UK. As you'll see, the title of our session is Some for Now and Some for Later, how a library is facing patrons' changing accessibility and discovery needs. We gave it this title because we really want to look at some of the immediate changes that libraries are implementing in response to COVID, but also keeping an eye on the long term. I'm just going to do a very brief introduction and share what I hope will be some interesting data, and then each of our three speakers will share their own experiences and insights, and we'll leave time for Q&A at the end. Do please put any questions you have for our speakers in the chat box as we go along, and I will then put them to the speakers at the end of the talks. You'll also notice that we've got some polls going as well, because we would love to get your thoughts on some of the things that we're talking about. So if you go into the poll section on Passable, you'll be asked a couple of questions in there as well. So just very briefly, before introducing you properly to Holly, Kelly, and Nick, I wanted to share some data from Lean Library, which I thought you might find interesting, and which is a quite good backdrop, I think, to some of the dramatic changes over the last year or so. So, as I said, we are an access solution that streamlines remote access for patrons, and we do that through a browser extension. So what you're seeing here is our user numbers and the average usage of those users from February 2020 through to May. And as you can see here, I expect it to be no surprise to you for other digital resources you have. We noticed a dramatic shift as patrons moved to studying and researching remotely. What was interesting to us, though, is that we found that those who may have been reluctant to use our particular digital tool in the past were now signing up in large numbers, and everyone increased their usage. So again, as I say, none of that I'm sure will be particularly surprising to you, but I thought it'd be quite interesting to introduce this session and to have a bit of a reminder of some of the scale of the changes that you as librarians are dealing with, and the change in patron behavior that you're both enabling and responding to. I would also just make a caveat to this that it'll be interesting to see whether these trends continue for us. We don't know that yet. And also, I can't speak for how applicable these are to other digital resources. But let me introduce you now to our speakers. So as I say, we have Holly Mercer, Acting Dean of Libraries at the University of Tennessee. And Holly is going to be speaking to us about her experiences of meeting accessibility requirements. We also have Kelly here. Kelly is Associate Librarian at Siena College, and we'll be talking about how the college has improved access during the pandemic, but also its plans for the future. And then finally, Nick, who's Director of Library and Campus Services at Sheffield Hallam University. And Nick is going to be speaking about the library's mission, values, and being human. Oh, apologies, I've just skipped through a slide. Yeah, just before I pass over to Holly, let me just remind you of those polls that we have. Please do fill them in as you go along, and also please add any questions you have in the chat, and I'll make sure to ask them at the end.
Thank you, Matt, and hello to everyone attending the session. At the University of Tennessee, Knoxville, about 80% of our materials budget is dedicated to electronic resources. And since March of this year, the libraries has preferred digital formats even more, like most of us, I assume. And we've worked to provide access to students, faculty, and staff wherever they are. Here in the US, we're familiar with the Americans with Disabilities Act, and in the state of Tennessee from 2014, there's been an additional law that applies to higher education. The Tennessee Higher Education Commission, or THEC, issued implementation recommendations for the new law in 2015 that stipulate deployment of accessible information materials and technologies, including library resources. And accessible means the individuals with disabilities are able to independently acquire the same information, engage in the same interactions, and enjoy the same services within the same time frame as individuals without disabilities, with substantially equivalent ease of use. Before UT Libraries licenses a resource, we must ensure the information materials and technologies meet the standards set forth by that law, and that includes adherence to WCAG 2.0, A and AA standard, or EPUB 3, and the vendor must provide accessibility testing results and written documentation and verifying accessibility, commonly referred to as VPAT, or voluntary product accessibility test. So the accessibility requirements thus far have been, we've approached them as a compliance issue, something that we that we must do. Meanwhile, we're acquiring more non-traditional electronic resources, such as immersive experiences and augmented reality products. And these are being requested by instructors for enriched learning experiences for their students. And therefore, these are not accessible. They do not meet those rigorous standards. And so we're also beginning to author an increasing number of equally effective alternative access plans, which we accomplish by completing an alternative access template that documents how we will provide that equivalent experience. This is a tremendous amount of work and likely an inferior experience that is not equal. But what if we stopped approaching accessibility as a compliance step or an obligation and instead approached it as a social justice issue? Accessible information materials and technologies are inclusive information materials and resources, and they reduce at least some of the access barriers faced by members of the university community. So shouldn't we invest our financial resources in information materials and technologies that benefit all of us? Last month, we began a process to reconsider how we make acquisitions decisions to better align our actions with our values. And we're developing a framework to guide how we develop our collections, including negotiation points for licensed electronic resources to include accessibility. While most library vendors are proactive regarding accessibility, not all are, and particularly with these immersive experiences or digital media. My hope is that we can use this new framework to encourage all vendors to take accessibility seriously and for them to think through how they can provide these inclusive technologies and resources, and in doing so, that all scholars will derive the benefits of access for research and learning. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Holly. You can all see this, I hope, but the poll answers have come through as well to a question that related to Holly's presentation, which was, how important are accessibility standards to your library? 45% of you said somewhat important and becoming more so. 42% of you said very important, and 12% said standards have to be met in every case with no exceptions. So really interesting to see the range there. Right. I'm going to hand over to Kelly now, talking about access during the pandemic and beyond.
Okay, thank you, Matt, and hi, everyone. So Sienna college is a small liberal arts college in New York State. And we have an average enrollment of about 3,000 students. We went remote in March, and then we reopened again in August with in-person, online, and also hybrid courses. So following our shutdown, of course, our library team went into adding COVID services such as curbside pickup and book paging and controlled digital lending to support print reserves. But we also increased our streaming platform options along with our ebook vendor contracts. So while all that was going on, as the e-resources librarian, my focus was really on trying to implement some practical tools that would not only support online learning, but also work well for us in a post-pandemic library, whatever that might look like. So when considering remote access to discovery and e-resources, the Lean Library tool immediately came to my mind because I had evaluated it years back, and the problem was I couldn't justify the investment because we were largely residential, so we couldn't take full advantage of the tool. But fast forward to 2020, and we were able to get on board with it pretty quickly. And so far, we've been pretty happy with what the functionality of this browser extension. So we've got some more marketing to do with it, but so far it's working out pretty well for us. So another tool, again, that I had considered years ago was the curriculum builder. We're EDS customers. And at that time, this was a few years back, we had little interest from our LMS administrators. So again, fast forward to 2020, and EBSCO announced that they were offering the EDS LTI integration for Canvas, which is our LMS. So after speaking with our Canvas administrator, we actually had it implemented within hours. So that's the difference between a few years ago and in 2020. I mean, this will increase our discovery and our workflow efficiency for our instructors, but I think it's a pretty good example of how a simple tool, and free in this case, can make a significant impact on the user experience. So I'm also the reference coordinator at Siena, and I was able to do a few simple things over the summer to enhance our reference services as well. We are SpringShare customers, so I simply added Zoom integration for both our chat modules and our LibCal modules so that we could take over chat screens or patron screens during chat sessions, but also enable virtual appointments for our patrons, and that happens within the SpringShare system, so we have good analytics on everything. So one of the other things that I did that I'm pretty happy about was we were able to get this underutilized office space transformed into a socially distanced consultation area, which I'm thinking moving forward is going to help us transition from our traditional reference desk to a more tiered reference model, because we are small and we pride ourselves on the one-on-one, but as our online services just continue to increase, we really need that extra nudge to start looking at different models. So I think this will help us to do that. So just to wrap it up, what I'm learning through all this is that these new tools and services, are really useful, but it can be a real challenge to implement them during the pandemic, because I feel like everyone has a lot on their plate, and having one more tool to learn or one more technology to learn or implement it can be overwhelming. So that was a bit frustrating for me at first when trying to get things up and running, but you know, I just kind of had to take a step back and realize that it's going to take time, and that the important thing is that we stay committed and focused and do whatever we can to improve the access for our patrons. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Kelly. And it's interesting that you ended with that note, because in the poll answer to the question, what are the biggest challenges you delivering library resources to your patrons? The second biggest challenge, at 22%, was communicating with and training patrons. So that clearly resonated. The biggest challenge was finding digital alternatives to physical resources. Anyway, so thank you all for completing that poll. That's really interesting. And then now I'm going to hand over to Nick to talk about mission, values, and being human.
Thank you, Matt. Hi, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here at this year's Charleston Conference. Just so you understand the kind of institution I work at, Sheffield Hallam University is an applied university. We have about 30,000 students. My contribution is more of a thought piece than anything technical. And I'm going to start with some context. So a few months before the pandemic, I took part in a podcast to discuss the future role of academic libraries. And I did a great deal of reflection, as you'd expect, before I did that. Looking back several months later and through this pandemic, I find my views remain unchanged. And that is perhaps counterintuitive, given the change we're experiencing. And for me, this is because the experience of the pandemic reaffirms and reinforces the mission and values of academic libraries, and arguably the wider knowledge community. Access to knowledge, literacy and skills, inclusivity and collaboration have become even more vital to education, to research, and to society as a whole. And this is really important in guiding our approach to accessibility and discovery. During the pandemic, the library at Sheffield Hallam played an integral role in providing access to learning as part of a whole institution approach. Through the ebb and flow of restrictions and a move to blended delivery, we've been well positioned to respond. Back in March, my university surveyed students and found a fifth had issues getting online. They didn't have reliable access to the internet at home, they didn't have a laptop. So the university supplied 900 students with laptops and subsidized a further 500 to buy their own device. So digital poverty is real, and it's the first barrier to access. And when you overcome that, you have to ensure students and indeed staff have the digital skills to participate and be successful. My university places great importance on its civic role. Many of our students come from our city and region. Many are commuter students. Commuter students in the UK tend to have more caring responsibilities, part-time jobs, and other disadvantages to their study. Many are the first in their families to participate in higher education. So as I work with my team to create a new library plan, our ambition is to become a truly inclusive service in everything we do, including accessibility and discovery, and to really find new ways to serve our city. So for me, the pandemic has reinforced the need to take positive action. And this is our approach to accessibility and discovery. Matt, can I have the next slide, please? Thank you. So starting with principles, I think it's really clear that in terms of access and discovery and making things available for all students and all staff, you've really got to make them anytime, anywhere, free at the point of need. And these are, I think, ideals we've long cherished and tried to do, and to an extent succeeded in. But they're really a starting point when you design and adapt your services. Providing access to the library online as part of course delivery and the curriculum is critical in this regard. Online reading or resource lists, so using software such as Ithaka S+R, are essential to provide students with structured access to their directed reading, however we source and provide the scholarly content behind it. This is also a key space where the library can inspire and influence diversification of the curriculum. And of course, well-designed digital services to give access and discovery are nothing without the content. So we must continue to advance open research and engage with publishers and work in partnership on affordability. And there's been significant activity in the UK over the summer to do exactly that. We have a track record, I think, professionally to promote responsible metrics for research. but it struck me as I was preparing my slides for today that we don't really talk about responsible metadata, whether it's a version of record, the repository, or the catalog. So just think, how could metadata support our institutions to be anti-racist? There is so much we could do in that space. I continue to be frustrated day to day that we don't have more services built on the data we have or the data we could create. There's huge potential to create services for accessibility, for discovery that compete with the best of the web. Just look at your phone. I won't name the apps, but there's some pretty major apps out there. I don't know why we don't have the equivalent for libraries. Data from student use of the library, their access, their discovery can make a key contribution to learning analytics, which is now even more important than ever for student engagement and retention. And looking ahead, I believe AI and big data will transform the library online, but I don't feel we're adopting a role as active players as yet in that space to ensure it's done the right way and at human scale. I think this is imperative. And as we focus on online delivery during the pandemic, we must look beyond just uniting patrons with content. We've got to use digital to connect people with each other. In that way, the library is a wellbeing intervention, and we should be recreating the full library online, I think. And to really think beyond the pandemic when we can start reconnecting our physical spaces with the online library. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nick. And we also had a poll that very relevant to Nick's presentation. And the question was, has the move to remote education and research improved or worsened inclusive access amongst your patrons? And about the same number said more inclusive as said less inclusive, 11% and 14% respectively. And 64% of you said too early to say. So just goes to show that it is the right time to be thinking about this so that we can monitor it throughout. I'm just going to make sure I pick up questions from the chat, which is going to take a bit of PowerPoint gymnastics. So I think the main question that springs from a lot of the presentations would be whether the pandemic is accelerating long-term changes for the library, or whether these are temporary responses or a combination. Can I put that to the panel, and who would like to pick that up first?
I mean, I'll add, I definitely, from my experience, think that it's accelerating processes. I mean, I already gave some examples, I think, but you know, our reference model, I think, is a really good one. This is something that's been back in the back of my mind for years, but it's just something we don't really want to let go of. But you know, as I look at the analytics from year to year, the writing's kind of on the wall with that. And it's just one example. I think a lot of the things we've implemented, we will continue to use after the pandemic. And I don't think we'll ever go back to, because Siena is unique in that we didn't really get into any distance learning or online learning until very recently. And so I think, again, there's a situation where we're going to have that moving forward from here on in. So things like Lean Library will still be useful after that. So it's just a couple examples.
I would say that, yeah, I mean, I think we're all seeing that, you know, the pandemic is amplifying, accelerating trends and issues. I'd say that if I was positive, I'd say that where I see existing inequality exacerbated and becoming more of a problem, whether that's about access to learning through library resources or teaching materials, I'd also say it's driving innovation. So I think it's helped us focus on what's most important. So I've got several teams who've turned projects around which normally would have taken a lot longer, whether it's about getting the support or doing the design and delivery. So we launched a pre-enrollment digital skills module for all new and returning students to take, so they level up and get back in the swing of things and get au fait with the new mode of delivery. We've done lots of work on textbooks, which I won't say anything more about, but I think you'll all be familiar with that. And we're just really looking at making these innovations and doing it in an inclusive and compassionate way. But I think it is a long-term project. But I think there is a benefit in that I think people are seeing these divisions, these gaps to make up more clearly, and they will invest in them and hopefully start solving some of these issues where we haven't historically.
And like Kelly and Nick, I think that the pandemic has accelerated change, and I certainly have learned that our staff in the libraries are creative and really focused on meeting student and researcher needs. And so those are positives. It's also put in sharp focus. We've, over the years, spent a lot of time and money on making our spaces something that people want to use, and designing new rooms for maker spaces and virtual reality and visualization. And now what's most important are collections, and helping people know how to locate them and use them and evaluate them. And it has very abruptly shifted focus for us from our spaces, and thinking of that as the library, to really emphasizing that our resources and the people that help with the resources are the most important thing for our users right now.
Thank you so much. We have 2 more questions, but we're running low on time now, so we'll respond to them in the chat. They're about the posting of the poll results, which we can definitely do, and a question to Kelly as well, which we'll pick up. But we just wanted to leave you with some final thoughts. When we were reviewing our various talks today, we thought this was a thought-provoking image to finish on, with the question of how we are supporting accessibility, equality, and inclusivity. I'm sure this is be a familiar image to some of you, but it's the question of whether we are giving everyone the same opportunities, adapting our services to cater to the unique needs of some of our patrons, or whether we're putting patrons at the center of our thinking from the outset, so that we don't need to make those adaptations after the fact, which is very effectively illustrated by removing the fence altogether. Well, thank you so much to our panelists, and thank you to all of you that have joined us on the last day here. It's been a pleasure.